Hey guys, what's up? I'm Ella, and today I want to talk about the new phone that Samsung just released, the Galaxy S21 FE. So this phone is quite similar to the regular S21. It even looks almost exactly like it, but with some corners cut to chop down the retail price by $100. However, we can expect the S21 FE to be on sale often, so it's not really a $699 phone. And in fact, right now it's already on discount for basically $599 on Amazon. So if you can get this at $600, then the S21 FE is at the same price as the Google Pixel 6. And when this phone first launched, there was quite a bit of hype surrounding it due to its strong specs, and it was considered to be one of the best value phones. However, there were also many reports of the Pixel being buggy and having issues, which I did experience myself. And so now that the FE is here, is this the new best value phone? In this video, I'll be putting the S21 FE in perspective against its competitors, mainly the Pixel 6, and at the end, I will also have some camera comparisons between these two. And let's just get into it. Okay, so the specs of the S21 FE are overall very similar to the one-year-old S21. It has the same Snapdragon 888, a last-gen flagship CPU at this point, with a 1080 AMOLED screen at 120Hz that can go basically just as bright as the S21 screen. So the FE has a bright and fast screen that you'll have no problem seeing even under bright sunlight. Some other flagship features that the FE also has are IP68 water and dust resistance, 15-watt fast wireless charging, and a Gorilla Glass Victus screen. Now, interestingly, the FE is actually slightly heavier with a larger screen than the S21, but to be honest, the weight difference is barely noticeable even when I'm holding these two at the same time. The FE does have the same plastic body with an aluminum frame, and the plastic back does have a nice and smooth texture that doesn't catch too many fingerprints. And regarding the cameras, so the S21 and the FE version actually have the same exact main camera sensor, which is quite nice, and somewhat surprisingly, the FE does have a higher resolution selfie camera that does take better photos. And as you can see here, it is a bit less noisy in the shadows on the FE's photos. Now, in addition to the sharper selfie camera, the FE does have a few more advantages over the S21. For one, the 1 year later release date means that the FE will receive 1 more year of software support. Also, the FE, being a slightly larger phone, has a larger battery at 4,500 milliamp hours versus 4,000 on the S21. But somewhat disappointingly, this does not result in a longer battery life than the S21 in my testing, and this could be because the FE's 120Hz screen is not adaptive. And besides the screen, there are a few more places where corners were cut for this phone. So the camera bump is plastic instead of aluminum. Now, this doesn't really have an impact on the phone functionally, but it does make it look lower quality. And the silver rings around the camera certainly don't help with the look. The telephoto lens on the FE is only 8 megapixels versus 64 megapixels on the S21. This difference is definitely noticeable. The FE's photos just don't look as clear and sharp, but it's still better than what the Pixel 6 can produce with no telephoto lens, which I'll get to a bit later. The FE's ultra-wide is also a slight downgrade with a smaller sensor, and this does result in more noise and less sharpness in the photos. Now, aside from the cameras, the fingerprint reader on the FE is optical instead of ultrasonic, so it will flash a bright light every time you use it. And this can be pretty annoying at night, but functionally, it's still very fast. But I did notice that when the finger is a little bit moist, the optical one doesn't really work anymore, whereas the ultrasonic one still works perfectly fine. In addition to that, the haptics and speakers on the FE are also slightly worse. And the best way that I can describe the haptics on the FE is that they feel more violent, kind of like more shaky. And as for the speakers, even though they are still stereo, they have a slightly more tinny sound. Lastly, note that the base version of the FE comes with 6 gigs of RAM instead of 8 gigs on the S21. However, 6 versus 8 doesn't really affect its performance, even in heavier tasks such as gaming. And despite the difference in RAM, these two scored very close to each other. The corners that were cut to bring down the FE's price don't negatively impact its performance or my user experience that much. I'm very glad that they didn't downgrade the SoC and also kept the 120Hz AMOLED screen, the IP68 water and dust resistance, and the wireless charging. Using this phone does feel feel very similar to using the S21. And note that you can get the S21 on discount for about $700 pretty frequently, and so it doesn't make much sense to get the FE at the same $700 price point. So I would only consider getting the FE if it were on discount. And at its current discounted price of $600, the FE definitely seems like a great value phone, especially if you don't super care about the downsides that I just mentioned. And now I'll talk about how it competes against the Pixel 6. Okay, so regarding the Pixel, I do want to first clarify that the Pixel 6 launched at $599, so $100 less than the FE at $699. But the Pixel 6 will likely not go on sale. It wasn't even on sale during the holiday season, whereas the FE is already immediately on sale for the same price as the Pixel. Okay, so these two phones are very similar in size. Both of them have a 6.4-inch display, but the Pixel does have a glass back, which I do prefer over the all plastic back, but it can also be a downside since it makes the phone heavier and also easier to crack. And both have stereo speakers that sound pretty similar in terms of the quality, but I do prefer the haptics on the Pixel a bit more because it feels more refined and controlled. And as for their screens, so they both have a 1080 AMOLED screen, but the Pixel only goes to 90 Hz rather than 120 Hz on the FE. 90 Hz is a significant upgrade over 60 Hz. However, it is still noticeably worse than 120 Hz, which makes scrolling around on the phone feel really smooth. A 120 Hz screen would be great for playing games too, but neither of these two phones handle heavy games very well. So on paper, the Pixel does have a faster GPU and it does perform better initially. However, for both of these phones, the main concern is actually the thermals. When under a heavy load for 20 minutes, both of them overheated pretty quickly after around just 5 minutes. So in reality, the Pixel doesn't really have an advantage in terms of gaming performance, especially with a 90 Hz screen. And in contrast, the Realme GT, which was designed with gaming in mind, has much better thermals overall. And so under the same test, it was able to sustain its performance for much longer. But in non-gaming day-to-day tasks, both the Tensor and the Snapdragon are going to perform more than fast enough, and there likely won't be any overheating issues either. And in terms of the battery, so the Pixel does have a noticeably longer battery life. In my test, both phones started out at 100%, and after about 30 minutes of the benchmarking and also 30 minutes of playing a video in a loop, the Pixel was left at 85%, whereas the FE only had 75%. And this may be due to the Pixel's lower 90 Hz refresh rate that's also adaptive. And let's talk a bit more about the Tensor chip. So it does bring some unique features, such as faster and smarter voice typing. Other Pixel-only features include using your Google Assistant to screen calls and automatically displaying a song that's playing in your environment. There are also live captions, which generates captions for any video that's playing on your phone, and these captions can be translated too. However, I actually recently found out that Samsung can do this too, so this is actually no longer a Pixel-only feature. Speaking of which, so Samsung does have some of its own unique features as well, like Samsung DeX, which turns your phone into a desktop. It's pretty cool, but it's still far from a true desktop experience, and so I almost never use it. The FE also supports wireless power share, which is super convenient for charging up things like AirPods or Galaxy Buds. And of course, the FE has a nice ecosystem with other Samsung accessories and computers. For example, the Galaxy Buds can use the higher resolution codec called Samsung Scalable Codec. But this still isn't the full picture because the Pixel has some unique and somewhat strange flaws. So the Pixel's wireless charging behaves pretty weirdly. It either doesn't charge at all or charges at extremely slow speeds. And I have tested this on 3 different wireless charging pads with many different bricks, and it's the same problem everywhere. So both my Pixel 6 and the 6 Pro have had all sorts of bugs pretty much since launch. And at one point, I couldn't even scroll through YouTube Studio, a Google-made app, without it crashing. Now, I did get the new January 2022 update, which does seem to resolve most of those issues. However, adaptive brightness on the Pixel still doesn't work very well for me. Kind of feels like it just erratically does its own thing. Being left with buggy software for 2 months straight ever since November is not a great feeling. And this certainly left me with some doubts regarding the quality and the software support for these Pixels. All right, and lastly, let's take a look at these two cameras. So the main sensor actually looks pretty comparable in terms of technical abilities. Both are detailed with great dynamic range. However, I did notice that the Pixel processing sometimes creates a different look that isn't very realistic. For example, this photo where the Pixel made the sky blue, even though it was golden hour and the sky was definitely more orange like the one on Samsung. And as for the telephoto, so the Pixel 6 doesn't have one, and the difference between digital crop and a telephoto lens is immediately apparent. You can still see some of the details in the windows on the Samsung's photos, photo, whereas on the Pixel, there's almost no detail. And in general, the Pixel's photo just looks a lot worse. The selfie cameras on these two are quite similar as well in terms of the quality, but I would say that the FE is a bit better as well as with more detail. However, you might prefer the processing and the look of Pixel selfies. Okay, so overall, I do prefer the FE over the Pixel 6 for things such as the faster screen, the wireless charging that actually works, and also a more fully featured camera system. And compared to the S21, even though the FE is $100 less, it actually doesn't lose out on a lot of those staple flagship features. And so the overall performance and user experience of this phone is very strong. And lastly, compared to phones from other brands that are similar or lower priced, such as the Realme GT or the ZTE Axon 30, I find that those other phones oftentimes lose out on more flagship features. So for example, water resistance, stereo speakers, wireless charging, and Gorilla Glass, just to name a few. And of course, the FE being part of the Samsung Galaxy series means that it has great software support. And in my roughly 9 months of daily driving the regular S21, Samsung's One UI has always been great, very reliable, no weird bugs like the Pixel. So yeah, for $600, this is definitely my favorite phone. However, I wouldn't get this for the retail price of $700 because at that price point, you can probably pick up an S21 on discount. And regarding the upcoming S22, so I think the S22 will be far more expensive and isn't really meant to compete with this phone in any way. And so if you're looking to pick up a phone for around $600, then this is probably as good of a time to do so as any. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting and helpful. And also let me know your thoughts on the S21 FE down below. If you did enjoy this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel so that you'll get more videos like this one. Here are my other social media platforms, so feel free to follow me on those if you would like to. And yeah, that's all that I have to say for this video, so I really hope to see you in another one of my videos. Bye!